Ladies and gentlemen, Rangers training camp is upon us. Which young players need a strong showing, and which position battles should we be watching?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1141 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So today's the big training camp opening episode. We've got rosters. Basically, everybody that is a member, player in the New York Ranger organization is going to participate, with a couple of minor exceptions. We'll get into that in just a second. Also, going to be going ahead and talking about 10 players that I think we're going to do it very rapid fire. 10 players that I believe really need to have a big training camp for the New York Rangers for varying reasons, and we'll get into that in just a second. And also going to conclude today's episode by taking a look at some training camp battles that I think we're all going to want to watch as the camp and certainly the preseason proceed over the next couple of weeks here. But we begin with the training camp roster. The Rangers released it the other day. I'm going to share this on screen for anybody watching on YouTube and for anybody on audio. I mean, I'm not going to read the entire roster because there are a lot of players here, to say the least. We have a grand total of 35 forwards, 21 defensemen, and 6 goalies. Needless to say that every single one of those players will not be on the New York Ranger opening night roster. Some of them have virtually no chance, but it's great that everybody's here, and the Ranger coaching staff, the Ranger brass, gets to look at all these different players. So definitely looking forward to seeing what they can do. And as is always the case in the preseason, as the camp goes on, as the preseason games go on, this list will kind of whittle down, and eventually you'll have, the 22 or so players that are going to be on the Rangers opening night roster to start the season. That'll kind of take care of itself as we go here, and obviously we'll keep everybody posted as far as, which players are not going to make the team and who's going back to this league or that league, who's going to the Hartford Wolfpack, all that good stuff. We'll be keeping tabs on that, obviously, throughout the entire training camp and the entire preseason as well. So definitely looking forward to seeing things get underway here. And once, training camp begins here, basically, again, to make it official, it's actually going to be beginning tomorrow. I believe I misspoke just a second ago. Ranger training camp will begin on Wednesday, tomorrow, September 18th, with off-ice testing. And then the first on-ice session will be on Thursday, September 19th, 2 days from now, at the MSG Training Center in Tarrytown. That's the same place where the Rangers went ahead and had their rookie camp, and rookie camp's actually concluding today. Today, Tuesday, is the final day of rookie camp. Of course, some of those players will also be participating in the Rangers, traditional training camp. But yeah, camp's going to run from tomorrow until Sunday, October 6th, and it will obviously include the 6 preseason games as well. The final preseason game will be on October 4th at the Islanders, the final of the 6 preseason games. So it sounds like camp is going to be concluding 2 days after the final preseason game, which is probably a good way to do it. And then after that, circle your calendars. The Rangers will start the regular season on Wednesday, October 9th at Pittsburgh at 7:30 p.m. And, as far as how this is going to work, it's going to work the same way it does every season. The Rangers and the coaching staff going to go ahead and conduct the training camp, I'm sure, however they see fit, and they'll do whatever they need to do, and we'll figure out who's going to make this team in due time. Now, I mentioned a second ago there were a handful, not really a handful, there's 3. There's 3 names missing, 3 notable names missing from this training camp roster, and I'll explain why these guys are not going to participate in just a second. But there will be no Gabe Perreault. He will not participate in this training camp. No Drew Fortescue. He was a 3rd-round defenseman that was selected last year. He's not going to be there either. Gabe Perreault, of course, the Rangers' 1st-round pick from last season. And then also E.J. Emery, defenseman and 1st-round pick by the Rangers from this past year's draft. My understanding, the way that this works, is that all 3 of these players are ineligible due to the fact that they will be continuing their college careers. If they were to participate in this training camp for the Rangers, then none of them would be eligible to continue with their college careers. So we won't be seeing, for everybody excited about some of these prospects, not going to be seeing them with the Rangers this season. But for some of them, I would say, certainly for Perreault, as soon as possibly next season, that's certainly something that could come to fruition. We'll see how it all shakes out. Depends on, what he wants to do, what the Rangers want to do, and I'm sure they'll handle it as best as they can. It's also, again, for some context, it's Tuesday as I'm recording this. So once again, the Ranger rookie camp will be wrapping up a little bit later today. If anything noteworthy happens there, we'll certainly talk about that in a future episode. Obviously, they had the 2 games against the Flyers. They split those games on Friday and Saturday, but now rookie training camp wrapping up, and we get to, proper Rangers training camp, traditional Rangers training camp, which begins on tomorrow, which is, of course, Wednesday. And it also sounds like, big announcement here on Twitter, I saw this right before I hit record here, sounds like a little bit later this morning, we're going to have Chris Drury meeting with members of the Ranger media. So I'm sure he's going to be asked about a lot. I mean, you got to think that the whole Jacob Trouba topic, that's certainly going to come up, and I'm sure some other things as well. Just, the thought process of how they put this team together and what the goals are for the season. The goals really should not have changed. They should be nothing short of winning a Stanley Cup. But we'll see what Chris Drury says, and we'll talk about his comments in a future episode. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second here. I do want to shift our attention in just a second to... Well, we're going to keep our attention on the Ranger training camp, but we're going to shift our attention more specifically to 10 players that need a strong showing for varying reasons in this New York Ranger training camp. We'll get to all that fun stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even faster and even easier. Gametime filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands upon thousands of tickets. You got Gametime Picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You've also got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You've also got seat views. Get a panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy. You've also got the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is game time. All right, we're going to go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers, as always, as we gear up for the start of a new New York Rangers season. Again, it is Tuesday morning as I'm recording this, and as I mentioned, Chris Drury going to be meeting with the media a little bit later today. We're going to have some thoughts on whatever he says later today, the biggest talking points to come out of Drury's session with the media. We're also going to be continuing with our best and worst case scenarios and moving on to Adam Fox in a future episode as well. This thing keeps getting pushed back because different things keep happening with the Rangers, and we got to adjust on the fly, but we will eventually get back to that fun-filled series that we do every offseason, and more specifically, we will focus in on Adam Fox when we continue with that series. But I want to shift our attention right now to 10 players, and we're going to go kind of rapid fire here, and we'll talk in greater detail about, all these players and some other players as well as the training camp progresses here. But I've got 10 players here who I believe need to have a big training camp for the New York Rangers. And we're going to start with a familiar name. His name has come up quite a bit when we were previewing the rookie series and really after the rookie series as well. And that's going to be defenseman Matthew Robertson, former second-round pick by the New York Rangers, now 23 years old, not ancient or anything like that. But I do think it was telling that last year the Rangers had a couple of opportunities to potentially call Robertson up to the NHL. We've seen them do that with some young players. Will Cooley for 4 games 2 years ago, Brian Hoffman for 3 games last year. You could have called up Matthew Robertson for a game, maybe even 2 games when the Rangers were dealing with, injuries to this player or that player. There was also a time late in the season when 3 different Ranger defensemen who were in the top 6 were all out of the lineup with various injuries. And Trouba was suspended. That might have been the reason why he was out of the lineup. But bottom line, there were some openings there, and Matthew Robertson never got the call. We saw guys like journeyman Connor Mackey and Brandon Scanlon. They got 1 game each with the New York Rangers. We never saw Matthew Robertson. So, Robertson, it's time to put the pedal to the metal. I thought overall he played pretty well in those games against the Flyers, those 2 rookie games from the weekend series there. But, I do think it's kind of telling that, Robertson being 23, just hasn't been able to crack the NHL roster, the Ranger roster, not even for a quick cameo, a quick cup of coffee, as we've seen them do with other Ranger players. You think back to like Keandre Miller, and I realized Miller was a first-round pick, Robertson was a second-round pick, but still, Miller wasn't expected to make the team the 1 year, and he made it as a 20-year-old, and he's been here ever since. And we haven't seen anything like that from Matthew Robertson. Braden Schneider is another great example. They called him up in the middle of the season when he was 20 years old, has been here ever since. Matthew Robertson, he's 23 now, still has not cracked the NHL roster. So I think Matthew Robertson in the camp, and then certainly in these preseason games as well, going to need a strong showing for himself. I don't expect him to make the team almost regardless of what he does, but he can at least improve his stock a little bit. And if there's a situation where there is an injury to one of the Ranger defensemen, at least he's now in the conversation to be called up. And if that's the case, perhaps we see Robertson at long last make his NHL debut this season. We're going to do a quick 2-for-1 here with another couple of rookies, another couple of players that participated in the rookie camp. It's going to be Brennan Othmann and Brett Berard. These were the two guys that I think a lot of us were looking to going into that rookie camp and probably even into traditional training camp here as well. But these are the two guys that I think a lot of Ranger fans are looking to as like kind of the top prospects, or at least the most NHL-ready prospects that the Rangers currently have in their system. I would say Gabe Perreault is probably the biggest prospect that the Rangers have, but he's not going to play in the NHL this season. So these guys, they're certainly in the top 5, each of them. I mean, I'd put Brennan Othmann at number 2. Berard's probably like in the 3, 4, 5 range, depending on where you want to rank him. But the two of them didn't do a whole lot in that rookie series against the Flyers. I mean, both had a couple of moments here and there, but, Berard took a penalty in game 2. Then he took a 5-minute major, got tossed out of the game. Othmann just was kind of quiet, and there were times where he passed where I think he could have shot. He did have the shootout game winner in game 1. But, I think all of us are really looking forward to seeing what the two of these players can do, and they can certainly help their cause to, in Berard's case, make his NHL debut this year, and in Brennan Othmann's case, possibly become a New York Ranger regular, at least by the middle parts of the season, or maybe right out of training camp. You never know. It's certainly at least possible either one of these guys can make the team, but it's only going to happen if one or both of them have a very strong training camp and a very strong showing in the preseason. We're going to do another 2-for-1 here. This one's pretty self-explanatory, but the Rangers brought in a couple of players on PTOs, Adam Ernie and Madison Bowie. I think by the very nature of a PTO, a lot of the times you're kind of facing an uphill battle. That's certainly the case with these two players, and they're going to have a strong showing if they're going to make it. We have seen in recent history with the Rangers, Jimmy Vesey was on a PTO. Ben Harper was on a PTO. They're both still here, 2 years later. Harper's, of course, coming off of an injury. We'll probably start the season with the Hartford Wolfpack. But it can be done. We'll see how it goes with both of these players, and two players that I think we're all going to definitely be watching in the preseason. All right, time to shift our attention to a veteran and a player that's been on the Rangers for several seasons. That would be none other than the captain, Jacob Trouba. This one, we're talking about young players and guys on PTOs that are trying to make the team. This might at first glance feel a little bit out of place here, but you got to remember, Jacob Trouba had a really, really, really rough showing in the Stanley Cup playoffs last year. And we had all these rumors in the offseason that the Rangers, they're going to move on from him one way or another. There's a framework in place for a trade with Detroit. They're going to send Trouba to Detroit. Detroit's going to take on $6.5 million of his cap hit or whatever it was. There was some reporting in there that wasn't very good. Didn't really make a whole lot of sense. We had the whole situation where we were all left wondering if, Trouba's contract, if his wife's residency is part of that contract. Just kind of a strange situation. And obviously nothing happened. But it's a big camp for Jacob Trouba. I think a lot of Ranger fans were really upset with the way that he played last year in the playoffs. I think a lot of people are certainly going to have him under a magnifying glass this upcoming season. And Trouba himself, I mean, forget about all the outside noise and last year's playoffs and everything. The very simple truth is that Jacob Trouba is going to have his hands full trying to hold off Braden Schneider and maintain his spot in the top 4. I think for sure you could pretty much pencil in Fox and Lindgren. We pretty much know those two are going to be together, barring something unforeseen. Miller's going to be in the top 4. It's basically Schneider versus Trouba for that spot. And right now, I mean, I feel like it should be Schneider, but if Jacob Trouba, comes out ready to go, leads this team the way that he's capable of, plays certainly better in the preseason and in training camp than he did, down the stretch last year and certainly into the playoffs, then he might be able to hold off Braden Schneider. But this is an important camp and an important preseason for Jacob Trouba. You don't usually say that about a captain of a team, but I mean, he needs to redeem himself in the eyes of a lot of Ranger fans. And honestly, the only truly happy ending and the only like big time redemption that Jacob Trouba is going to get, there's only one way, and that's if the Rangers win the Stanley Cup this upcoming season, which is obviously much easier said than done. I think they still have an excellent team. We'll see how far they can go. But man, it's a long way back to the Eastern Conference Final. You got an 82-game regular season, and you got to get past a couple of teams in the playoffs, and then you're in the Eastern Conference Final, and you're still not there. You're still not where you want to be. It's just an extraordinarily difficult championship to win. But that's what it's going to take for Jacob Trouba to, I think in the eyes of most fans, really go down as like a truly great Ranger if he can lead this team to a Stanley Cup. Another player that needs a big training camp, and this is really all just tied into his health, but it's going to be Filipino. Bottom line, he just has to stay healthy, and none of his injuries, none of his concussion issues are in any way meant to be blamed on Filipino. It's completely out of his hands, and it's really unfortunate what he's gone through, both from a physical and I'm sure a mental perspective as well. Stuck with it last year, eventually got back for some playoff games, and really has a chance to be one of the X factors on this team if he can stay healthy. And again, it's one of those things where it's through no fault of his own that he's missed as much time as he has, but Filipino being the third line center is going to be huge for this team this upcoming season, because if Filipino is not the third line center, and I know there's some Ranger fans, and you can count me among you, that would like to see Filipino at the wing, possibly even with Mika and Kreider, but I feel like that ship has sailed. They're just not going to do it. They see Filipino as a center. That's where they're going to put him. So I've kind of given up on that. However, third line center, that's still a huge spot for Filipino on this Ranger team, because they don't really have much of a backup plan there if Filipino is unavailable. I mean, you look at this team right now, who centers the third line if Filipino is out of the lineup? I mean, you could go with probably Johnny Brodzinski would be the guy. I see him as probably maybe opening the season as a 13th forward, but if something happens to Hedl, I think you'd put him on the third line as opposed to somebody like Sam Carrick. You could always try to rush one of the young centers in your pipeline to the NHL. Somebody like Bryce McConnell-Barker, Ryder Korzak comes to mind as well, but those guys are young. McConnell-Barker, I believe, is 20, and Korzak, I think, is 21. Adam Sikora is there too, former second-round pick, 20 years old. I mean, do you really want to just throw these guys into the fire? It's at least possible, and we've seen some recent examples of the Rangers having some players debut at some very young ages. But yeah, I mean, that's it gets pretty dicey if you don't have Filipino available to center your third line. And obviously, health and happiness and all that stuff in life, that all comes before hockey. But Filipino, we hope that he's healthy, and he's going to play a huge role for this team. But it really just comes down to staying healthy when it comes to Filipino. Somebody else who needs a big training camp, a big preseason, Kakko. The cold, hard truth here is that the clock is ticking when it comes to Kakko. He signed a 1-year extension with the Rangers this offseason. It feels to me like even if he does well this year, there's a very good chance it's going to be Kakko's final season as a member of the New York Rangers. You look ahead to next offseason, and you've got, I mean, there's a lot of free agents, RFAs and UFAs, but the guys that I think you really look at and you really probably want to keep in the fold are Igor Shesterkin, Alexis Lafreniere, K'Andre Miller. Those three players are not going to come cheap, and I just don't see a situation where Kakko is going to jump any of those three guys in the pecking order, where it's like, we get to next year's offseason, it's like, oh man, we got to hang on to Kakko. Forget about Igor and Lafreniere. We need Kakko in the mix. I just don't see that happening. And the other thing here, too, to consider with Kakko is that there are other players on the way. I mentioned Othman and Berard a second ago. This is year 6 for Kakko. If he doesn't do enough in the preseason and in training camp and the early games of the regular season, he's probably the player that's going to be squeezed out in favor of one of those two guys. When you look at the Ranger top 9 right now, and if we just assume that everybody's healthy to start the season, if one of them were to lose their spot to one of the big Ranger prospects, and again, Othman and Berard are the two names that really come to mind, but if that were to happen, it's probably Kakko who's the odd man out. Do you then put Kakko on the fourth line? I mean, he's not really a fourth line player. I guess you could do that, but I don't know. To me, that's not a good situation for Kakko. So he's somebody that really needs to show up and play well this upcoming season. Wasn't able to take advantage, by his own admission, wasn't able to take advantage of the opportunity to play with Mika and Kreider last year. Obviously dealt with some injuries. The year before that was his best as a pro. I want to say 40 points for Kakko, but the Rangers need a little bit more, and Kakko is somebody that is certainly going to be another player under the microscope, not just from fans, but I think from the coaching staff as well, as far as, whether they can look to move forward with him and if he is going to hang on to his spot in the top 9 for the entire season and hold off some of these prospects. We got 2 more here. I will also say Riley Smith, by far the Rangers' biggest pickup of the offseason. They trade second-round pick to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Riley Smith. He far and away, again, the best player that the Rangers added to this roster from, a different roster from around the NHL this offseason. But he's got a chance here to solidify himself with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. I don't think they're going to break up Panarin and Trocheck and Lafreniere. You could get fancy there and try, Mika and Panarin and Lafreniere, whatever you want to do there. But I get the feeling they're going to leave that line intact. And that means that Riley Smith has an opportunity, but he's got to hit the ground running with Mika Zibanejad and with Chris Kreider. He's got a chance to do that right from the start of training camp. And I think these preseason games are going to be huge when it comes to him, hopefully building chemistry with each of those players. So Riley Smith needs a big camp as well. And one more here, it's going to be Zach Jones. It finally feels like Zach Jones is actually going to get some rope this year and that he has easily the inside track to that number 6 defenseman job, that spot in the lineup that's kind of been elusive for him. He's been in the lineup. He's been out of the lineup. Not too long ago, Peter Laviolette spoke very highly of Zach Jones, his ability to, just play good hockey for the Rangers last year, despite once again being in and out of the lineup on, countless amount of occasions, depending on who was injured and who was suspended and what the deal was with this guy or that guy. Jones was in and out of the lineup quite a bit and played well despite it. He was also, it's important to note with Jones, he was drafted by the previous regime. And, he's been a subject over the years. Some of these things are fan created, but he's been the subject of, trade rumors. And I believe Jones himself, one of the off seasons, actually requested a trade by the Rangers. We'll see how it goes, but he's going to have to go out there and bring it and hold off veterans, like Ruhwedel, hold off veterans like some of the guys I mentioned a second ago, Mackey, Scanlon, Harper, whoever it might be. And then also the prospects. One of those guys could be along Robertson, Mancini certainly come to mind. So Zach Jones, it looks like it's his job to lose, but he's going to have to play well if he wants to keep it. And again, that starts in the training camp and in the preseason. So going to go ahead and keep everything rolling in just a second here. I want to shift our attention to some training camp battles that have kind of caught my attention and share them with you guys in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you will be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sports book. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Figure we can close out today's episode by talking about a handful of training camp battles that have certainly caught my attention. I mean, training camp hasn't started yet, but these battles are going to happen once it does. So first and foremost, and we talked about this a little bit on and off, in the last handful of episodes here, but I think we all have to keep an eye on the Rangers' fourth line. And honestly, you could lump all of these fourth line style players in with the previous group that we did just a couple of minutes ago as far as guys who need a big training camp. But I want to talk about it here because this is a 6 or 7 man battle for 3 spots, basically. The 3 forwards that seem the most likely to me to be in the lineup on opening night from left to right on that fourth line, I've got Jimmy Vesey, I've got Sam Carrick, and I've got Matt Rempe. That's the way it feels like the Rangers are going to go. We talked about this recently, but Matt Rempe not participating in rookie camp, that feels like a vote of confidence in Rempe, and it kind of gives you the idea that he's, probably the favorite to start this upcoming season at fourth line right wing. Jimmy Vesey, just a trusted, reliable, hardworking veteran. I think for sure, he brings some value to this team as a penalty killer and just a good defensive forward and somebody that goes out there and works hard, fights for loose pucks. Somebody that can also, move up the lineup in a pinch. It's not ideal, I don't think, to have Vesey in your top 6, but he's not completely out of place there either. So for that reason, I think he brings some value. And Sam Carrick, technically the Rangers' biggest free agent signing of the offseason, which I don't know how I don't feel great about that. But the bottom line, the preseason is come and gone. The Rangers are going to have made all the moves that they're going to make. There might be a PTO here and there, but all the big moves have been made. But Sam Carrick, again, hard-nosed, hard-working, fourth-line player, going to go out there and play with some grit. He's going to kill some penalties too. He's going to win some faceoffs. To me, that's probably his job to lose to start the season. But all 3 of these guys, I don't know that any of the 3 of them are immune from possibly being a healthy scratch at some point this season. I would think VZ probably has the most job security in that regard among the three players that I just mentioned, but I don't see Sam Carrick playing all 82. I don't see Matt Rempe playing all 82. These guys all have their work cut out for them, trying to hold off some of these other candidates to play on the fourth line for the Rangers. You've got Adam Edstrom, who is coming off of a fantastic showing at the Ranger Rookie Series against the Philadelphia Flyer rookies. He scored 3 goals. He was all over the ice. His 3 goals, 1 on the power play, 1 even strength, 1 shorthanded. He stood out on the penalty kill. He was playing with a little bit of edge out there as well. He almost had 4 goals. He almost had a hat trick in the first game. He fired a shot off the post. So Edstrom was awesome. I think his stock and his chances of making this team, I'd still put it less than 50-50 to start the season, but it's certainly risen from where it was just a handful of days ago here. So Adam Edstrom's going to be in the mix. You've got Johnny Brodzinski as well. Feel-good story last year, finally became an NHL regular at the age of 30. And another guy, high energy, hustle type player, somebody that can go out there and maybe add, a little bit of scoring punch, has a sneaky good shot, put up awesome numbers at the AHL. Obviously, the NHL is a different monster, but Johnny Brodzinski is going to be in the mix as well. And Adam Ernie, touched on him very briefly not too long ago, earlier in this episode. He's in there on a PTO. He could not make the Rangers entirely and end up as a free agent again, or he could be in the lineup on the fourth line on opening night. Anything is certainly possible there. We'll see how it goes. There could even be another dark horse veteran or even a young guy. Riley Nash is there. He's a veteran. Alex Belzile, who the Rangers signed during last offseason. I believe he's like 33 now. So there's a lot of players, but it's going to be a lot of fun to watch this play out. Like I said, we've got 4 preseason games, and, may the best men win as it pertains to who's going to be on the fourth line to start the season for the New York Rangers. Another one here, Braden Schneider versus Jacob Trouba. We touched on this a little bit earlier in today's episode, but one of these guys is going to be in the top 4 to start the season, and one of them is not. And I think certainly both are capable of playing that role. Jacob Trouba, of course, did struggle down the stretch last year and certainly into the playoffs as well. Braden Schneider, he's basically, a top 4 defenseman who has been in a bottom 2 role for, I'd say, at least the last 2 seasons. Somebody that goes out there and, for the most part, plays mistake-free hockey. Somebody that's just been very consistent and just very solid for this team ever since he got called up as a 20-year-old, a handful of seasons ago there. He's really done a nice job for this team, plays with a lot of physicality, and somewhat surprisingly, Braden Schneider seemed to have better chemistry with K'Andre Miller than Jacob Trouba did, which is strange because Trouba and Miller have been playing together basically ever since K'Andre Miller debuted, and I believe Miller has now completed 4 seasons in the NHL. But it was noticeable, when Trouba was out of the lineup with an injury late in the season, K'Andre Miller picked it up. He played better hockey with Braden Schneider than he did with Jacob Trouba. So if you believe in chemistry and, don't mess with what's working, then maybe Braden Schneider with K'Andre Miller is the way to go. It's also possible, and I've mentioned this in the past too, maybe the Rangers is kind of a make good and a sign of faith in their captain. Maybe they kind of have in mind that he's going to start the season in the top 4, and they can make an adjustment, down the road if they need to do that. That's entirely possible as well. We'll see how that goes, but definitely going to be paying attention to Schneider versus Trouba. Another big-time position battle in camp. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The battle to play on the right wing of the Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider line. And this is, of course, assuming that Zibanejad and Kreider stay together for this upcoming season, which, we'll see. There's a case to be made to maybe split them up. I would probably leave them together to start the season, let them do their thing, and hopefully, get off to a solid start this year. And if they do that, then again, the $1 million question becomes, okay, who plays on the right wing with them? And as I mentioned earlier, you could get fancy. You could juggle the lines a little bit. You could put Lafreniere with the 2 of them and maybe go with somebody else like a Riley Smith with Panarin and Trocheck. But the bottom line, I'm not touching, at least to start the season, I'm not touching the Panarin, Trocheck, Lafreniere line. That was absolute lethal last year. That trio was absolutely lethal. So I'm not going to mess with that. That means that Mika and Kreider are going to have to figure it out with somebody else, and we'll see how it goes. I get the feeling, and this would be my vote as well, that the Rangers will start Riley Smith there, and they'll see if he's able to click with Mika and Kreider. But you've got other guys in the mix here as well. You could basically go through the entire roster. Kakko, if Smith falters, if that doesn't work, if Kakko plays well in a bottom 6 role, you could see him ascend to the Mika line. You could go with Philip Pedal, but as I mentioned earlier, they seem pretty committed to making him a center. And the other problem there, too, is if you remove him from the third line center, and we talked about this earlier, then who centers the third line? And I don't have a good answer for that. Maybe Johnny Brodzinski could handle it and hold it down there. We will see. if that were to play out that way. But I don't see them putting Phil Hedl on the right wing with Mika and Kreider. You could go with an off-the-wall option, though. You could go with Brandon Othmann. I mean, if Othmann makes this team and you just want to throw him into the deep end, you could go with Brandon Othmann on the right wing with Mika and Kreider. That does present some challenges because that would mean either Othmann or Kreider would have to move from left wing to right wing. And they've both done that, at other points in their career, but they're both natural left wingers. So there's a little bit of a challenge there. I tweeted this out during the Ranger rookie camp when Adam Edstrom was basically, setting the world on fire there. And I was mostly joking, but I can't say I was 100% joking. I said something on Twitter to the effect of, oh man, how long until we're all demanding that Adam Edstrom play with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider? Now, I do want to pump the brakes. I don't think we're there yet. But if Adam Edstrom, throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, continues to go out there and just show out the way that he did in those 2 rookie games, then I think he at least enters the chat. I wouldn't start him there. He's probably not even going to be on the team to start the regular season, but does he become an option for this team and even on the Mika line somewhere down the road? It's at least possible. I think that certainly crazier things have happened. I'm not going to be pounding on the desk demanding for that to happen, but yeah, you never know what can happen. And the bottom line, they've tried everybody else there, so maybe sooner or later it would be Adam Edstrom's turn. And failing that, you could go with a veteran option. Jimmy Vesey, I mentioned before, he can play up the lineup in a pinch. I think so too can Johnny Brodzinski. You got some options, but the bottom line, there's like 6, 7, 8 players that you could conceivably, at one time or another in this upcoming season, see playing with Mika and Kreider. And again, that's if we assume that Mika and Kreider stick together, for the entire season or at least most of it. One more training camp battle here before we call it a day. The second power play. This one feels wide open. If we assume that the Rangers will leave the first power play unit intact, then that would include Panarin, Mika, Kreider, Trocheck, and Fox. The second unit at that point, I think Lafreniere's a lock. If they stick with that first power play unit. I think Riley Smith is borderline lock. I don't think they would leave him out of both power play units. Probably Philip Hedl if he's healthy. After that, though, you've got 2 spots that I think are completely up for grabs for players like Will Cooley, Kakko, K'Andre Miller, Jacob Trouba, possibly Zach Jones, maybe even somebody like Brodzinski. If he's in the lineup, it's at least possible. I think that's wide open, and that's something that I'll certainly be keeping an eye on as well. But I figure we can call it there for today. If you guys have stories from this most recent Ranger playoff run, I would love to hear them. I'm going to be sharing them on a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Basically just looking to share stories from what you guys were doing and how you reacted when the Rangers won one of their 4 playoff overtime games from this last year's run. But yeah, figure we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.